I remember the exact moment my life shifted from excitement to something I still can't name without feeling sick to my stomach. It was 3 weeks before my wedding, and I was sitting on the floor of my childhood bedroom, surrounded by scraps of ivory satin and crumpled to-do lists. My mum had gone to make tea, and I was pinning lace to the bodice of my dress when my sister Emily came in without knocking. She leaned against the doorframe, her hair in perfect waves, wearing that shade of lipstick she knew made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. "How's the bride?" she asked with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We were only 2 years apart, but Emily had always been the one people noticed first. Louder, bolder, the kind of person who could charm a stranger in 30 seconds. Growing up, I didn't mind being in her shadow. She was my big sister, and I loved her. But that day, something in her tone made me pause. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just stressed. She walked in and picked up the invitation from my nightstand, reading it aloud like she was tasting the words. "Rachel and Thomas," she said softly. "Sounds nice." Then she smiled at me in that way she does when she's already thought of something you don't know yet. I should have paid attention to that smile. We spent the afternoon together, going over seating arrangements. She suggested moving her closer to the front, "so I can help you if something goes wrong." It sounded reasonable. Emily had always been good at stepping in when I froze under pressure. That night I remember telling Thomas over the phone that Emily seemed unusually interested in the wedding details. He laughed and said, "Well, it's going to be the party of the year." I went to bed feeling strangely uneasy, like I'd forgotten to lock the front door. Over the next week, Emily started showing up more often. She offered to help pick the flowers, taste the cake, even join me at my dress fittings. At first, I was grateful. Planning a wedding while working full-time was exhausting, but little things began to feel off. She'd linger when Thomas stopped by, asking him questions about his job, his hobbies, things she already knew from years of family dinners. Once, when I went to the bathroom, I came back to find them laughing at some private joke I wasn't part of. Thomas looked up and quickly changed the subject. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, Emily had been dating someone for almost a year, a guy named Mark. She wouldn't cross that line. But then came the day we went to choose the final menu. Emily tagged along, saying she just wanted to make sure the food was perfect. During the tasting, I caught her watching Thomas more than she looked at the plates. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and didn't think it mattered. I tried to focus on the champagne poached salmon, but my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my fork. Later that night, I got a text from Emily. "Thomas is lucky to have you." I stared at it for a long time, wondering why it didn't feel like a compliment. The morning after, I woke up to find that Emily had posted a picture on Instagram, a selfie from the tasting, with Thomas in the background, smiling. The caption read, "Best day with my favorite people." My stomach tightened. I didn't say anything, but the seed of suspicion had already been planted. 2 days later, I was at the florist finalizing the arrangements when Thomas texted me saying he'd be late for dinner because he was helping Emily with something. At first, I thought it was sweet, my fiancé helping my sister, but then I realized I had no idea what that something was. I called him, and he said they were looking at options for my bachelorette party. I laughed nervously because Emily had already told me she wasn't planning it. My maid of honor, Claire, was. When I mentioned that, he hesitated for a second and then said, "Well, she just wanted my opinion." My opinion, not yours. The words rattled in my head for the rest of the day. That night, when I got home, Emily was sitting in my kitchen with a glass of wine, her coat tossed over the back of the chair like she'd been there for hours. "Thomas says you've been stressed," she said, tilting her head. "I think you need to let go a little. Enjoy these last few weeks." Her voice was light, but I felt something sharp underneath it. I told her I was fine, but she just smiled and sipped her wine. I noticed her nails were painted a deep crimson, something she only ever did when she wanted to be noticed. We used to call it her man-trap color when we were teenagers. The next week was a blur of fittings, appointments, and family dinners. Emily was at almost everyone, even when she wasn't invited. She'd slide into conversations, redirect them toward herself, and I couldn't help but notice how Thomas's eyes followed her sometimes when she spoke. Once, at my parents' house, I came back from the bathroom and found them in the living room alone. She was leaning close to him, her hand brushing his arm as she laughed at something he'd said. When they saw me, they both straightened instantly, like kids caught with their hands in the cookie jar. "We were just talking about the wedding music," Thomas said quickly, his cheeks slightly flushed. That night, I lay awake, replaying every interaction between them over the past month. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that wedding stress was making me paranoid. But then, one Saturday, I went to pick up my dress, and the seamstress casually mentioned how sweet my fiancé was for stopping by earlier, with your sister, to check on the alterations. I froze, clutching the fabric. They hadn't told me they'd gone together. I smiled politely to the seamstress, but inside, my stomach was twisting. When I got home, Thomas acted normal, asking about my day. I wanted to confront him, but the fear of hearing something I couldn't unhear kept my mouth shut. Instead, I busied myself with centerpieces, trying to push the thoughts away. Emily called later that night, her voice syrupy. "Just checking in on my favorite bride," she said. I asked what she'd been up to, and she replied, "Oh, just making sure everything is perfect for you." My hands tightened around the phone. I told her I appreciated it, but the truth was, I felt like she was tightening her grip on something that wasn't hers to hold. The next time I saw them together was at my bridal shower, and it still plays in my head like a scene from a movie I wish I could delete. The afternoon had started beautifully. Sunlight spilling through my mother's backyard, white paper lanterns swaying in the breeze, the table set with pastel cupcakes and champagne glasses clinking. Friends and family gathered around, their voices mingling with soft music. Emily arrived late, of course, sweeping in with a bouquet of peonies that matched the ones in my centerpieces exactly, like she'd been waiting for the perfect moment to make an entrance. Everyone's eyes turned to her, and I caught the little smirk she wore when she knew she had the room. Thomas was there too, because my family had insisted he stop by for a toast before heading to his bachelor gathering. I was halfway through opening gifts when Emily slipped into the chair beside him. At first, it was harmless, just her leaning in to whisper something, making him laugh. But then I noticed her hand resting casually on the back of his chair, fingers brushing his shoulder. It was subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice, but I did. I knew that gesture. I'd seen it 100 times when she wanted to stake a quiet claim. My chest tightened, and I tried to focus on the ribbon I was untangling, but my mind was buzzing so loudly I couldn't hear the chatter around me. When it came time for Thomas to give his little speech, he stood up, smiling at me, in that way that used to make my heart swell. "I can't wait to marry you," he said, his voice warm. And then, God, I can still see it, he glanced at Emily for half a second before finishing. "And start this new chapter together." My friends clapped, my mother teared up, but I felt like I'd just been shoved underwater. Later, when most guests had gone inside to get dessert, I found Thomas and Emily on the back porch, their heads bent together over his phone. I stepped outside, forcing a smile, and Emily straightened instantly, handing him back the phone like it was nothing. "We were just looking at honeymoon spots," she said lightly. "Honeymoon spots. Without me." That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my bedroom with the lights off, scrolling through the photos on my phone. In picture after picture, Emily was right there, next to Thomas, laughing with him, looking at him. And in so many of those shots, his eyes weren't on the camera. They were on her. I told myself I'd bring it up the next day, but when the sun came up, the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. What if I was wrong? What if I ruined everything over nothing? So instead, I smiled through the next round of wedding prep, even as my chest felt like it was slowly caving in. A week before the wedding, things took a turn I could no longer explain away. I'd gone to the reception hall to finalize the seating chart with Claire, my maid of honor. We were hunched over a large table covered in little paper name cards, moving them around like puzzle pieces. When Claire glanced at the list and frowned. "Why is Emily sitting at the sweetheart table?" she asked. My head snapped up. "She's not," I said automatically, but Claire slid the list toward me, and there it was, in neat black letters, Emily's name, right next to mine and Thomas's. My stomach dropped. I pulled out my phone and called Thomas. He answered on the second ring, cheerful as always, and when I asked about the seating chart, he said, "Oh, Emily mentioned it might be nice to have her up there in case we need help during the dinner." Help? My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I told him it wasn't happening and that Claire would handle the seating. He didn't argue, but his tone changed. Cooler, distant, like I'd overreacted. That evening I decided to stop by his place to talk. His car was in the driveway, but when I knocked, no one answered. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to convince myself he was just out for a walk or in the shower, but the knot in my chest told me otherwise. I ended up driving past Emily's apartment. Her curtains were open and the lights were on. I saw movement. Thomas, standing in her kitchen, holding a glass of wine. Emily was leaning against the counter, her head tilted back in laughter. My hands tightened around the steering wheel so hard they hurt. I didn't knock. I didn't call. I just drove home, my vision blurring. The next day, Emily came over like nothing had happened. She brought a box of macarons, her peace offering for not being able to help with the florist that morning. We sat at my kitchen table, and I tried to read her face, to see if she knew I'd seen them. But she was the picture of casual ease, sipping her coffee, asking about the playlist for the reception. At one point she said, I think Thomas is going to make an amazing husband. You're lucky." The way she said "you're lucky" made my skin crawl. That night, I finally told Claire everything. About the Instagram post, the private jokes, the porch conversation, and now the scene at Emily's apartment. She looked at me for a long moment before saying, "Rach, you need to be careful. I've known Emily a long time, and she doesn't always play fair." Hearing someone else say it out loud made it real, in a way I'd been avoiding. I barely slept, my mind replaying every red flag I'd ignored. But nothing prepared me for what would happen on the morning of my wedding day. The morning of my wedding started with that strange suspended feeling, like time was both racing and dragging at once. I woke before my alarm, the soft light of dawn spilling across my room, my dress hanging in the corner like a promise. My mum was already bustling around downstairs, the scent of coffee and fresh pastries filling the air. I tried to hold on to that fragile bubble of excitement, telling myself today would be perfect, no matter what. The makeup artist arrived first, followed by the hairstylist, and soon my childhood bedroom was filled with the sound of curling irons, clinking makeup brushes, and the occasional burst of laughter from my bridesmaids. Emily was supposed to arrive at 9, but by 9:30 she still wasn't there. I told myself she was probably just running late, but a part of me, the part that had been on edge for weeks, started to ache. At 9:45, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "Don't freak out, I'm with Thomas. He needed to talk." My stomach turned cold. I stared at the message so long one of my bridesmaids had to nudge me. "Everything okay?" she asked, and I lied, saying Emily was just picking something up for me. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I tried calling Thomas. No answer. I tried Emily. straight to voicemail. By the time they arrived, together, it was almost 11. Emily walked in first, wearing a silk robe that looked suspiciously like the ones I'd bought for my bridesmaids, though hers was pure white, instead of blush pink. Thomas followed a step behind, his tie loose, his expression unreadable. Everyone in the room fell quiet, the air thick with something I couldn't name. "Sorry we're late," Emily said brightly, like we were meeting for brunch. "Thomas just had a few nerves this morning and I wanted to make sure he was okay." I felt every pair of eyes in the room flick between us. My mum handed me a cup of tea, her gaze sharp on Emily, but she said nothing. I wanted to scream, to demand why she thought she had the right to be with him, alone, on my wedding morning. Instead, I forced a smile and thanked her for helping. But inside, my chest was pounding so hard it hurt. As the morning went on, I couldn't shake the image of them together before they walked in. Where had they been? What had they talked about? Why did she look so smug, like she knew something I didn't? When it was finally time to leave for the venue, Emily insisted on riding in the same car as Thomas, to make sure he gets there on time. I watched them drive off together from the window of my bridal suite, the back of my throat burning. Claire squeezed my hand and whispered, "If you want to walk away, we can do that." I shook my head. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd get through the ceremony and deal with everything after. But deep down, I think I already knew. Something was about to happen that would change everything. The ceremony was set to start at 3 p.m. and by 2:45 guests were already seated, the soft hum of conversation floating through the air. I stood just behind the heavy wooden doors, clutching my bouquet so tightly the stems dug into my palms. My dad was beside me, his arm warm and solid, whispering that everything was going to be beautiful. I tried to believe him. The music started, the first notes of the processional drifting through the air, and my bridesmaids began their slow walk down the aisle. Claire glanced back at me just before she stepped forward, her eyes searching mine, as if silently asking if I was okay. I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. Then it was Emily's turn. My maid of honor, my sister. She appeared at the doorway in a gown that was supposed to match the other bridesmaids, but hers clung tighter, the slit running higher, the neckline dipping lower. She didn't look at me as she walked out. She was looking straight ahead, at Thomas. And Thomas, he didn't look away. His expression was something I'd never seen before. Not nervousness, not joy, something closer to longing. The music shifted for my entrance. My dad squeezed my hand, the doors opened, and everyone rose. I took my first step, forcing my eyes forward. Thomas was at the altar, Emily standing just off to the side behind him. And that's when I saw it, his hand brushing hers as he adjusted his cufflink. A tiny, almost imperceptible touch, but one that sent a jolt of heat through my chest. I walked slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last, my mind a blur of memories. The porch conversation, the wine at her apartment, the white robe that morning. By the time I reached him, my smile felt frozen in place. The officiant began speaking, his voice a distant murmur in my ears. I kept my eyes on Thomas, searching for the man I'd agreed to marry, but every time I glanced at Emily, she was watching him, not me. When it came time for the vows, Thomas hesitated for a beat too long. He looked at me, then at her, and then began speaking. The words were fine, even sweet on the surface, but they didn't feel like they were for me. My chest tightened, my hands trembling around the bouquet. And then, just as I was about to speak my vows, Emily's phone buzzed loudly in the quiet room. She didn't silence it. She answered it. Right there, in the middle of my wedding. "Hey," she whispered, stepping back a little. "Yeah, I can talk." The guests shifted uncomfortably, the officiant paused, and I felt heat rush to my face. She gave Thomas a quick glance, almost like a signal, before slipping out the side door. My vows caught in my throat. For the first time that day, I thought about running. I stood there frozen, my bouquet suddenly feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. My heartbeat pounding so loud it drowned out the soft music that had started up again to cover the awkward silence. The officiant gave me an encouraging nod, clearly waiting for me to continue. But my eyes kept flicking to the side door where Emily had disappeared. I couldn't focus on anything Thomas was saying, if he was even still talking, because all I could think was, why would she answer a call in the middle of my vows? And why had he looked at her like that before she left? My palms were slick, my knees trembling, and for a terrifying second, I thought I might actually faint. Then, just as the officiant prompted us to move forward, the side door creaked open. Emily walked back in, but not alone. Mark, her boyfriend, or I should say, ex-boyfriend, was right behind her, looking furious. His tie was undone, his face pale but tense. He didn't even look at me. His eyes went straight to Thomas. The guests started whispering, a ripple of confusion spreading through the room. Emily marched up the aisle without hesitation, stopping just a few feet from us. "I think everyone should hear this," she said loudly, her voice clear and cutting. Thomas's face went white. "Emily, not now," he began, but she cut him off with a small, almost satisfied smile. "No, now is perfect. Since you didn't tell her, I will." The room went completely silent. I could hear my own breathing, sharp and uneven. Emily turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Rachel," she said softly, almost sweetly, "Thomas and we've been seeing each other for months." For a moment I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. My mind refused to process the words. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, gasps from the front rows. My dad took a step toward me, but I couldn't move. Thomas tried to speak, stumbling over his words. "It's not what you think, but Emily laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Oh, it's exactly what she thinks. And maybe now you'll finally tell her what you told me last night." She looked straight at him, waiting. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. That silence was my answer. My bouquet slipped from my hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just felt hollow. The officiant was staring at us in disbelief, guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. And then, almost as if she was twisting the knife, Emily leaned closer to me and whispered, "You deserve better, sis, really." I stepped back from both of them, my breath coming fast, the edges of my vision going hazy. I didn't know if I wanted to scream or run or collapse, but I knew one thing: this wedding was over. The sound of the guests' whispers swelled around me like a wave I couldn't stop. My dad was suddenly at my side, his hands steady on my back, but my legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I looked at Thomas, really looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see the man I'd fallen in love with. I saw someone I didn't know at all. His mouth opened like he wanted to explain, but the way his eyes kept flicking toward Emily told me everything. He wasn't worried about me, he was worried about her. Emily, meanwhile, was the picture of composure, standing there in that dress like she belonged in the center of all this chaos. Then, without a shred of shame, she stepped toward Thomas and slipped her arm through his. My breath caught in my throat. She didn't even look at me when she said, "We'll go." And just like that, they started walking down the aisle together, my groom and my sister, past rows of stunned guests, out the same doors I was supposed to walk through as a married woman. The sight burned itself into my memory, every slow step they took echoing in my head. A few people tried to stop them. Mark muttered something sharp under his breath as they passed. My aunt gasped loudly, but they didn't break stride. When the doors closed behind them, The silence left behind was deafening. I felt Claire's hand wrap around mine, grounding me for just a second before the weight of what had happened crashed down all at once. My body started to shake. I could feel my mother's arms around me, hear my dad telling the guests that the ceremony was cancelled, but it all sounded far away, like I was underwater. I caught sight of the bouquet still lying where I'd dropped it, petals scattered across the floor, and something in me just broke. My knees gave way, but Claire caught me before I hit the ground. "Let's get you out of here," she whispered, guiding me toward the side room. I kept my head down, unable to meet anyone's eyes, the tears finally spilling hot and fast. By the time we reached the small bridal lounge, my makeup was ruined, my veil hanging lopsided, my hands clenched so tightly my knuckles were white. "What do you want to do?" Claire asked softly, crouching in front of me. I stared at the floor for a long time before I could speak. "I want to disappear," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And in that moment I meant it. The rest of the day blurred together in a haze of shock and humiliation. My parents insisted on taking me home, even though I kept saying I didn't want to face anyone. The drive felt endless, every mile stretching the ache in my chest tighter. When we finally pulled into the driveway, I noticed the neighbor across the street peeking from behind her curtain, and the thought of becoming someone's gossip made me want to crawl out of my own skin. Inside, my mum tried to coax me into eating something. She set a plate of toast in front of me, like I was a child again, but my stomach felt like a knot of stone. I just sat there at the kitchen table, still in my dress, staring at the untouched food until the tea in my cup went cold. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from friends, from guests, from people I hadn't spoken to in years who'd already heard what happened. I couldn't bring myself to read them. Claire texted once, "I'm here if you need me," and that was the only message I saved. Around 6 o'clock the sun was starting to set, painting the kitchen in gold, when my dad came in holding my bouquet. He must have gone back to the venue to get it. The petals were bruised, some falling loose, but it was still beautiful in that ruined way. He set it down gently on the counter, and kissed the top of my head without saying anything. That almost broke me more than the ceremony had. Later, when the house had gone quiet, I slipped out of the dress and into an old hoodie and sweatpants. I sat on the floor of my room, my back against the bed, and finally let myself cry. Not the silent tears from earlier, but the ugly gasping sobs that made my chest ache. I kept seeing them leaving together, her arm through his, the way he didn't look back. It was like watching my life fold in on itself. Around midnight, when I was too drained to cry anymore, I checked my phone again. There was a message from Thomas, just one sentence. "We didn't mean for it to happen like this." I stared at it for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Instead, I turned the phone face down and lay in the dark, wondering if I'd ever feel like myself again. By the next morning, the numbness had begun to harden into something sharper. I woke up with puffy eyes, my head pounding from crying, but underneath the exhaustion was a strange clarity. The image of Emily and Thomas walking out together still played on a loop in my head, but now it didn't make me want to collapse. It made me want to do something. My mum tried to talk me into resting, to not make any big decisions yet, but I'd already made one. If they wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone I loved, then I wasn't going to quietly disappear into the background like some discarded character in their story. I was going to take my narrative back. First, I called Claire. She didn't even say hello, just, "Tell me what you need." I told her I wanted every photo, every video from the wedding that anyone had, especially the moments when Emily and Thomas were together. Claire didn't ask why, just promised to start collecting them. Next, I went through my phone and screenshot every suspicious text and call log from the past month, times when Thomas had claimed to be busy, or when Emily had shown up unannounced. It was like laying out puzzle pieces I'd been too afraid to connect before. Each one made the picture clearer. uglier. By noon, I had an idea forming, one that wasn't just about revenge, but about making sure they couldn't rewrite what happened. I knew Emily. She thrived on controlling the version of events people heard. If I let her speak first, she'd spin this into some tragic, "we fell in love unexpectedly" story, painting herself as a victim of fate instead of the architect of betrayal. I wasn't going to let that happen. Around 3, I posted a simple message on my social media: "The wedding is off." Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who teach you the hardest lessons. Within minutes, the comments and private messages exploded. People wanted details, but I stayed vague. For now. That evening I went for a drive, ending up outside Emily's apartment without even meaning to. Her car was there. So was Thomas's. I sat in my car, engine off, watching the light in her living room flicker as they moved inside. My chest tightened, but instead of crying, I pulled out my phone and started typing in the Notes app. Not a rant, not a breakdown, a story. The real story. Names, dates, everything that had led up to that moment at the altar. It wasn't polished. It was raw, messy, and painfully honest. And when I was done, I read it back to myself and realized it wasn't just a vent, it was a weapon. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with my laptop open, my notes spread out beside me, replaying every moment in my head until I could stitch them into a timeline so clear no one could question it. The messages from Thomas, the posts Emily made that seemed harmless at the time, the coincidental appearances, the moments when they thought I wasn't looking, it all lined up like dominoes falling in slow motion toward the inevitable. By morning I had a document that was half confession, half indictment. I knew if I just posted it as is, people would skim it and move on. But if I paired it with the photos Claire was gathering, if I laid it out so even the most skeptical person could see the truth, then it wouldn't just be gossip, it would be undeniable. At 8 a.m. Claire came over with a flash drive and a grim look. "You might want to brace yourself," she said, and when I plugged it in I saw why. There were dozens of photos from the bridal shower, the rehearsal dinner, even candid shots from before the ceremony. In so many of them, Emily and Thomas were in the same frame, leaning toward each other, sharing glances they didn't think anyone noticed. In one from the rehearsal dinner, Emily's hand was on his thigh under the table. My stomach turned, but my resolve solidified. We spent the next few hours putting everything in order: photos, timestamps, screenshots, while my mum hovered in the kitchen, clearly wanting to intervene but not knowing how. By early afternoon I had the post ready. It wasn't angry or bitter. It was calm, factual, and impossible to refute. I didn't use dramatic language or insults. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. The last line read, "When my sister walked out of my wedding, arm in arm with my fiancé, she didn't just take the man I thought I loved. She took the version of myself who would have forgiven her. That version is gone." At 3 p.m. I hit post. The reaction was instant. My phone lit up with notifications, messages of support, shock, disbelief, and more than a few people telling me they'd never liked her anyway. But there was one message that stood out. It was from Mark, her ex. "If you're ready to really make them regret it, I have an idea." I stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding. I didn't know what he had in mind, but I knew one thing. I wasn't done yet. Mark and I met that evening at a quiet coffee shop across town, far enough from either of our neighborhoods that no one we knew would wander in. He looked rough, dark circles under his eyes, his jaw tight, but there was a sharp focus in the way he spoke, like he'd been rehearsing this moment. He slid his phone across the table toward me. "I think you should see this," he said. It was a series of screenshots, messages between him and Emily, from the weeks leading up to the wedding. In them she admitted she was confused, but couldn't stop thinking about Thomas. And worse, that she wanted to see if she could take him before the wedding. It wasn't about love. It was about winning. Reading those words, I felt a cold clarity settle over me. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd done it for sport. Mark leaned back, his coffee untouched. We could let this fade, or we could make sure they own what they did. We talked for hours, piecing together a plan that was equal parts truth-telling and poetic justice. First, we compiled everything. My photos, my post, his screenshots, and even a few short videos guests had sent him of Emily and Thomas together before the ceremony. Then we set up a shared folder, making sure it was impossible to trace to either of us directly. The next step was choosing where it would go, not just social media, but to people whose opinions they actually cared about. Thomas's boss, Emily's closest friends, even the organizer of the charity board she'd just joined. Every person received the same message. Before you work with them, you should know who they really are. By the time I went to bed that night, the folder had been opened dozens of times. By morning, it was hundreds. The ripple effect was faster than I'd expected. Thomas's company pulled him from a high-profile project, pending review. Emily's picture disappeared from the charity's website. Friends she'd known for years stopped commenting on her posts. She tried to call me twice, then sent a long, rambling message about how I'd taken things too far, and how we all make mistakes. I didn't respond. The last I heard, they'd moved in together, but it wasn't the fairy tale they'd imagined. People whispered, trust was gone, and the shine had worn off fast. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant exactly. It wasn't joy, but there was peace in knowing I hadn't stayed silent. One evening, months later, I walked past the reception hall where my wedding had almost happened. The lights were on inside, another couple about to start their forever. I didn't stop to watch, I just kept walking, breathing in the cool night air, thinking about how sometimes the real victory isn't getting revenge. It's making sure you never let someone steal your story again.